So this morning we are really fortunate to be joined by LaTricea Adams. LaTricea is a proud native of Memphis, Tennessee, and the founder and CEO and president of Black Millennials for Flint, a national grassroots environmental justice and civil rights organization with the purpose of bringing like-minded organizations together to collectively take action and advocate against the crisis of lead exposure, specifically in African American and Latinx communities throughout the nation. LaTricea is the youngest African American woman appointed to the inaugural White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. In addition to her environmental justice work, she is a former middle school and high school Spanish teacher and current district level educational administrator. LaTricea has a special ancestral connection to the land, being from both African and Latinx ancestry. Her love for the environment was sparked while spending time with her great-grandmother in South Memphis, one of the few places African Americans could live during Jim Crow. Through authentic storytelling, LaTricea will be speaking about the beauty of community environmental education as a form of advocacy and systemic change. So thank you so much, LaTricea, for being with us this morning, and I will hand it over to you.
All right, good. Oh, yes, raise the roof. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much for having me this morning, especially bright and early to start the day. I just wanted to open up and just say I had a wonderful opportunity to meet Jennifer in a much more formal space at Vandy, speaking to some great law students. So I was really excited to get the invitation to come into the space. And that was mean that this is my first convening with TWIG. I know now that it won't be my last, but I just wanted to start by saying thank you so much for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen, and I promise it's not going to be like super formal. I want this to be organic, but did want to just keep myself paced as I want to be respectful to everyone's time. So I wanted to first start out by just giving you an overview of who we are as an organization. I know it's probably strange, like, okay, she says she's from Memphis. Why does she have an organization with Flint in the namesake? So Black Millennials for Flint was actually founded in Washington, D.C. We, of course, responded like many people did in the wake of the Flint water crisis, but decided that more than just distributing water to residents in Flint, we had to get to the systemic issues surrounding environmental racism, environmental injustice. So around 2015 is when I learned of the Flint water crisis, even though it had literally been a full year before, when the switch happened to the Flint River. And to be perfectly honest, I felt like some of our big green organizations, some of our historical civil rights organizations really weren't as responsive as they should have been in the peak of the Flint water crisis. And so while back then, millennials were kind of the baby of the bunch, kind of older now. We have another generation, Gen Z, who is on fire. But at that time, in millennial fashion, I'm like, hey, if no one else is going to do it, then hey, I'm just going to put myself out there. So at that time, I still was living in Washington, D.C. I was the president of an organization called Thursday Network with the Greater Washington Urban League, which is an affiliate chapter of the National Urban League. And I partnered with some other young professionals across the country. One of the major partners was in Buffalo, New York. We found out very quickly it is expensive shipping water across country. And we're millennials, we're young, we're poor. I'm like, okay, I can't afford that. So luckily Target was able to partner with us, and we were able to do this big water distribution to folks in Flint. Fast forward to January of 2016, with the Urban League, we had membership orientation to bring new people into the organization. A young lady, Michelle Mapson, who is very important to this work. She was an environmental scientist. She was working for EPA under the Obama administration. Had never met this young lady before in my life. Graduate of from Michigan in environmental science, public health, Howard graduate. And so she said, hey, I like the project that you did in Flint. And I'm like, oh, thank you, yay. And then she went on to say, you know, that lead is not just an issue in Flint. And I'm, you know, thinking of originally at the time, I'm like, yeah, like I know a bit about like lead paint chips, kind of heard about that, like, you know, as a kid. And what really just kind of stopped me in my tracks is she said, did you realize that Freddie Gray experienced childhood lead poisoning? If you're not familiar with Freddie Gray was a young African American man that was murdered by Baltimore police in 2015. It's really important, like with this timeline, like with this journey into environmental justice work. And the civil unrest and the uprising in Baltimore had literally just happened months before, which was still very sensitive. And so it was a real full circle moment. This was a crisis, not just in Flint, but in majority Black and brown cities across the country. So I was already pretty fired up about what was going on in Flint. I kind of began to peel back the layers and really go down a rabbit hole and just learn a lot about what was going on, not just with lead in water, but lead in housing, issues with Superfund sites, and just all these elements of toxins that were in communities of people that look just like me. So in February, I was moving really quickly. In February, I did a national call. I'm like, whoever wants to get on this call, y'all, we got to figure out what can we do to simultaneously address and support people in Flint, but then also like, what can we do to attack and counter this issue surrounding lead? So on February the 10th, 2016, we came up with the name, which I hope that this gives like a bit more clarity. So we called it who it was. On that call was majority African American or Black millennials, and we all came together to wrap our arms around Flint. Flint is really, I mean, a spiritual connection that really awakened a sense of advocacy and social justice that was new to me, but was a calling. As you heard in the bio, I am a K-12 educator through and through, but still found my way from an education perspective, but on something that is all interconnected is with the environment. So we did our first service trip to Flint in April of 2016. We brought with us youth from DC. We also brought parents. That was really cool. We partnered with a DC-based youth leadership organization. This is many of their first time like being on a plane, so that was really adorable. And it was a really good experience, both for the youth and for the volunteers that came with us on that first trip. And it was folks from Philadelphia that also brought youth with them as well. Maybe about 2 weeks after we returned back from Flint to DC, the same children that came along with us got letters from school saying that there was lead in their school drinking water. And we're like, you gotta be kidding. So I was already mad about what was happening in Flint. And then as I was just really learning about and peeling back the layers with EJ, I'm like, this is really insane. So at that point, we kind of pivoted while we still were providing absolute support and priority to, at that point, just literally like the basic human needs to access to water in Flint. We began to dabble into political advocacy and policy. So to make a long story short with that, we held DC Council accountable, saying like, this is completely unacceptable. We worked with the same youth where we did like impromptu training with our young people where they went before DC Council and demanded that the adults that are responsible for keeping them safe, that they do that very thing. So it took us a long time. Really could have took longer. It took us about a year, but we got our first bill passed called the DC Childhood Lead Prevention Amendment Act of 2017. Y'all, I promise I did not come up with that name. And so it became one of the most rigorous bills in the country regulating testing for lead in school drinking water. The threshold for remediation, which we know no level of lead is safe, is 5 parts per billion. And also what was interesting about this particular bill is that it's explicitly named the agencies that were responsible for very specific aspects of testing. So for example, it named the Department of General Services were responsible for the actual technical assistance, like with monitoring and oversight, with the actual filtration at each respective school. DC Public Schools was responsible for signage and coordinating with the Department of General Services to ensure that filters were replaced in a timely fashion. The Office of the State Superintendent of Education was responsible for creating a database of all child care facilities. I'll talk about that a little bit later. All child care facilities, as well as home-based daycares, which we know a lot of children of color, a lot of children in economic distress spend a lot of time in the home and home-based daycares. So it's super nuanced. We were able to then take it a step further. We were able to get the same bill replicated through an amendment in the state of Maryland. And we also, interestingly enough, were very instrumental in the bill that currently exists in the state of Tennessee. Now, we know it's not as robust in the state of Tennessee, but that is very progressive, particularly at that time. Tennessee was one of about 8 at the time states that actually had a mandatory bill requiring lead testing in schools. I know sometimes Tennessee gets a lot of heat, especially from a legislature perspective on environmental issues, but that was something that we were really able to celebrate. So that was a really long-winded history of how I entered into this work. I am not at all a conventional environmentalist. If anything, I like to use myself as an example that we literally all have expertise in how we want to live healthily in our environment. If we don't share anything else, we have one environment that we all are interconnected with. So wanted to ground our conversation for today and who I am, and then how this work that is so near and dear to me came to be. So let me move this. You would think I would master Zoom at this point. So with Black Millennials for Flint, we have expanded over time and we still continue to. We're a young but small and mighty group, but to date, we have 4 core cities that we work in, boots on the ground, one of which is in Baltimore. Our work in Baltimore is more so focused on compliance with lead and housing. The 2 biggest projects that we've done in Baltimore, one, we were featured in a documentary on BET. I'm happy to share that link with Jennifer if you care to take a look at it. I'm not sure if you've ever watched The Wire from back in the day, but you'll see here, this is Michael K. Williams, rest his soul, who is now among the ancestors. But essentially in that documentary, it captures some of our work with canvassing. So we very much so ground ourselves in historical civil rights strategy and practices with doing door-to-door knocking and canvassing, where particularly in Baltimore, we really amplify tenants' rights. The state of Maryland has some pretty progressive legislation and policy surrounding lead, very strong in housing. But even though they have those policies in place, the implementation sometimes is a little less than desired. We've done some work with actually assessing the lead paint violation registry, and that's produced by the Baltimore Health Department. And literally there have been violations that date back to the early 2000s that still have not been remedied. in the city of Flint. We do a lot of work now around engagement with youth and young people, essentially to get them grounded in environmental justice work and political advocacy. We pivoted a bit where in the initial years, we focused a lot just on water access. I'm not sure if you're into like Will Smith and the Smith family. You'll see here, this is Jaden Smith. This is the lovely young lady that I talked about, Michelle, who later became a co-founder. And this is a young lady who is based in Flint, where we work very closely with them and her husband for the faith-based community. They've actually expanded their ministry where they have an organization, a nonprofit that we're very excited that we were able to support with called Revive Community Health Center, where they specifically focus on the intersection of maternal health through a wraparound service approach, which also incorporates aspects of environmental justice. In this particular picture, we had an opportunity to partner with Jaden Smith to bring what's called the water box to the city of Flint. So when we first met Katrina, again, this young lady in the middle, we asked her and her husband, okay, we're not from Flint. We don't want to adopt any type of colonial practices and kind of have this savior complex. What can we do to best serve the city of Flint? And so they said 3 key things. One of those things was they wanted the church to be a safe water station. And we were like, ooh, we don't have the funding for that, but let's put a pin in it and we'll get back to you. So in 2018, and this was a really big break for Black Millennials for Flint, I had an opportunity to be a panelist for a big green organization called Broccoli City. Broccoli City is based in DC, where they bring in pop culture, celebrities, just a lot of influencers into the environmental and sustainability space. And so I had an opportunity to be on a panel at the Google headquarters alongside like celebrities, Amanda Seals, actor Les Alonso, other really dynamic young lady, Kareen Taylor, who works in the environmental justice space. And while I was on that panel, a representative that works with Jaden Smith reached out to me. I kind of didn't believe it at first, where they were like, hey, Jaden has been trying to essentially like get an entry point into Flint, which is true. He had been saying since the inception of the crisis. And so we were really excited to serve as a community bridge between Jaden, his nonprofit, which is interestingly enough called 501c3, to get him more boots on the ground in the city of Flint. The work in the city of Memphis, which is near and dear to my heart, as that is my hometown. Even though Memphis sits on an aquifer and has some of the most pristine water in the world, we still have our bouts with infrastructure, with lead service lines, and then also some huge issues as it relates to lead and housing. So we do quite a bit of work in Memphis around community outreach and engagement, which I'll talk about as well, to really get people informed, but then also really matching that with prevention and political advocacy, capacity building, that people who are everyday folks who may not be as technically advanced within the environmental space still has enough so that they can sufficiently advocate for themselves for lead-free communities. And then in the District of Columbia, we really use DC twofold, where we replicate some of the work and strategy that we use in our other core cities, but of course we're on the Hill. So a lot of the work in our DC chapter is focused on federal engagement as it relates to policy. Some examples of that, we interact a lot with Congress. So we do lobby days, for example. We also just do one-offs with congressional staff and Senate staff and senators and Congress members, just to educate them from a very community up perspective around what some of the impacts and needs are from community. Which is a perfect segue with our core values. So as you can see, the theme and what we do with Black Millennials for Flint and things, again, that are very spiritually connected to me as a person, very much so engaged in community at the core of everything that we do. Education is life. I'm really grateful that I didn't get caught in a box thinking that I just had to be, not just, but just being a K through 12 teacher, but that being an educator is very, very fluid and can be applied to all aspects of life. Black and Latinx lives, which represents who I am as a person, my family, those people who make me who I am. Equity, and then also our catchphrases is a lead free USA, which we know that lead is everywhere. So that's going to be a fight for the long run. All right, oops, let's click here. I'm gonna skip through that. So part of the trivia questions, we talked about the mother of the EJ movement. So I wanna just talk about some of our programming. So in addition to doing a lot of work on political advocacy and policy, we also do a lot of work, as I mentioned, around community engagement, but then also leadership development. So for about almost 5 years now, one of our longest standing programs is called the Lead Prevention Ambassador Program, where we take, we engage with now Gen Z and Millennials, African American, Latinx. They can be from any type of sector, whether they may be engineers, we've had attorneys, we've had elementary school teachers, we've had a myriad of people to come through the program, where essentially, again, we build capacity with kind of doing an intro course, if you will, into environmental justice, but then pairing that with capacity building, with legislative engagement, but then also just creating the next pipeline generation of environmental justice leaders. But one of the things that is very important to us as a Black and Brown organization is to understand that the environmental justice movement started with people who look just like us. So we ground ourselves in who we are in this movement and how we show up into this space. And so we always talk about Dr. Robert Bullard, who's acknowledged as the father of the environmental justice movement, Hazel Johnson, which I want to speak to a little bit and hope that this gives you a little bit of inspiration. If you weren't familiar with Hazel Johnson, who is acknowledged as the mother of environmental justice. So specifically with Hazel Johnson, she is now among the ancestors. She passed away some years ago, but her work started in public housing as a resident in Chicago, where essentially she found that she was very ill very frequently, her children, as well as other people in her immediate community. And so she, very much so like me, just took it upon herself to say, okay, we need to do something. So juxtaposed with the Dr. Bullard, who is very heavy in higher ed and academia, Hazel Johnson is literally complete representation of the community and demonstrates building from the community up. And she's such an inspiration to my work and really is aligned with my perception of environmental justice work, that you don't necessarily have to have a ton of student loans with master's degrees, PhDs in environment, but you can very much still be an expert because it's based on your actual experience living in the environment. Also, the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice is very near and dear to our work and grounds us in all that we do. We saw that in one of the trivia questions. Everything we acknowledge the 17 principles. Again, these kind of like the Bible of the EJ movement was founded by Black and Brown people that look like the young people that we engage with, the communities that are hit the hardest as it relates to environmental justice issues. And then I know I'm coming up on time. I do want to leave you with a very personal story. Sorry for clicking through. I had like way too much stuff. Okay, I'm going to come off the screen. Stop sharing. So something else that really connects me to this work is being from a frontline community. And of course, like a frontline community is living in community that is literally at the foot of environmental toxins. You heard in my bio, I'm from Memphis, where there are a ton of environmental justice issues that exist in the city of Memphis. The community where my mother is from, where my great-grandparents moved to when they came from Texas and moved into Memphis, where my great-grandfather was in the military, but during Jim Crow, he still couldn't stay in Billington because it still was not desegregated. And there's literally a Valero refinery in the middle of South Memphis. So literally every single day, like you see the smokestacks from your home, right? And thinking about like every single day, like the foundations of my childhood, my mother's childhood, my grandmother's childhood, my great grandparents, like adulthood, breathing in these environmental toxins. And so as I become more educated in this work, I found out that I have fibroids and an ovarian cyst. So did my mom, so did my grandmother, who unfortunately had to go through massive life-altering surgery, and learning that the proximity with living near petrochemical plants make you more susceptible to reproductive health issues. So this work for me is beyond just like policy, right? It's beyond engaging like with elected officials. It's literally like impacting like not just me, but like my ability to be a mother, my mother's ability, you know, and me being here, being a miracle rainbow baby, you know, because of these environmental toxins that directly impact, again, everyone, but particularly people who look like me, who look like my mom, who look like my grandparents. So I wanted to just kind of share this journey where it definitely was divine. Y'all had no plans whatsoever to have a nonprofit, let alone an environmental justice nonprofit. But I hope that some of the things I said today resonated with you all and really gave a different perspective around environment. And I'm gonna follow instructions because I'm right at time. Jennifer, I think I'm supposed to open it up to questions that you all may have.
Yeah, thank you, LaTricea. And I know if we were in person, you'd be getting a huge round of applause. And I saw Kelly threw a little heart up, so it's hard to do virtually, but really thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with us this morning. We do have time for questions, so feel free to put them in the chat box, or if you want to just turn your camera on and come off mute and engage with LaTricea that way, that would be great also. But I'll kick us off with a first question. So you wear a couple different hats, and they're exhausting hats to wear. I think all of them can be, you know, emotionally challenging, can be tiring, can be exhausting. So what keeps you going? What keeps you motivated and energized and passionate about the work you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question and the realest of real questions. So even like right now, we are Black Millennials for Flint. We're in New Orleans, actually. It's the Essence Festival, which is supposed to be like, yay, fun, party time. Nope, we're going to be talking to people today about environmental justice. But what keeps me going literally is community. So even though like Black and brown people like started this movement, like it's very under-resourced. And so I very much believe in the mantra that to whom much is given, much is expected. And I've been given like some really powerful positions that I didn't even honestly feel like I was prepared for. Like, you want me to do this? And so what keeps me grounded is knowing that there is such a critical need. And so my community holds me accountable with making sure that in the spaces that have not always been accessible to people like me, that I always remain steadfast that it's not, I'm bigger than myself now, right? Where I'm not just coming into spaces just for LaTricea, but I have Flint, I got Baltimore, I got Memphis, you know, I have all of these hard hit communities that I have to represent. Also, you all will learn this if you get to spend more time with me. I'm pretty outspoken to a point, even times I'm like, dang, did I say that? But it's needed, right? It's needed. And that also like keeps me going, that like, I got a whole tribe of people who have my back when I'm speaking for the best interest of people, that even though I might be boxing with some pretty, you know, powerful people, that I'm still doing like what's best for community. So that's what kind of keeps me going. And naps. I am a serial napper. People always say like, why do you sleep? I absolutely sleep. But it's through series of naps. I get that in there.
I think there's some credibility to that. So you might be onto something there. We do have a question from Deanna. She asked, what is your best advice for getting youth involved, even if they're not specifically facing environmental justice issues?
Yeah, so actually, y'all, it's really easy to get youth involved. I think just the culture of Gen Z, they, I mean, have been so instrumental even with pushing our current administration on really centering things, for example, around climate, but then also allowing there to be non-judgmental spaces for them. I think one of the things that I pride ourselves on as an organization is we don't create like this entry point with prerequisite that like you have to have like a master's degree from Harvard, or a law degree from whomever in order to enter into this space, but really honor anybody that wants to come into this space as like, this is for you. There's not like a checklist of how you can enter into an environment, because that, I mean, we're all here. We didn't have prerequisites to get into the environment. You shouldn't have prerequisites to get into the space to advocate for it. Then also, I'd like to say we make environment cool, y'all. So like when we work with youth and we create these really innovative spaces to talk about and advocate for environment, they'll say like, well, we thought like environment was talking about polar bears. Look, I love polar bears for sure. Like we need them, they're adorable, but that's not the full gamut of environment. And so young people are very much so social justice centered. And I think that's what also helps us to captivate younger people.
Awesome, thank you. We have another question. Someone asked, what do you believe are some of the top hurdles to progressing change? Are there differences in the different cities that you work in?
Ooh, Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I learned that the hard way. Coming back to Tennessee, it's tough. But I will say, and this is not just because Jennifer's on here. Now, the state is a lot more progressive than our legislature. But in places like DC is very unique, where DC is not a state. So to get bills passed in DC, you just have to go through DC Council, right? So you can learn a lot being in a place like DC, because it's still red tape, but it's not as much of a hurdle because of the sheer dynamic of the District of Columbia. Then like you have more progressive states like Maryland, which particularly around lead has just been around a lot longer, for decades, with some of their legislation. We reference the state of Maryland a lot in the work that we do. But then like in the state of Michigan, y'all believe it or not, it's not all that progressive in Michigan. Some of the work that we've been able to even get done in Tennessee does not exist in pure Michigan, which is frustrating. From a community perspective, I would say that the culture of DC is very transient. So you have DC natives there, but a large portion of DC is people from all over. And so there's still a sense of ownership like from natives, but not like it is in Flint, not like it is in Memphis, where folks are very territorial of their community. And I would say that we have to do a lot of work with building trust and rapport in cities like Flint and cities like Memphis because of trauma. And just people who are in and out of cities, and just like being in frontline communities. So that's a perfect question. The way that we show up in each respective city is very much so tailored to that particular city. Even some of the work that we do has to reflect the demand of the community, and we try to be in alignment with what already exists, so that we're careful not to impose like our views, our perceptions. Now, Memphis is a little bit different because that's my hometown, it's my territory. But in some of the other cities, we do have to be very nuanced in our method of engagement.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point that applies kind of regardless of what your work is or what sector you're in, just to always come in as the listener first and not enter a new space and think that you have all the answers.
Is it me, or did Jennifer freeze up a little bit?
Yeah, she's frozen.
I think she. I haven't met you yet.
Because I'm all over, right?
So we have a.
Are you in Nashville?
I am, and I work at TWIG. So I'm a colleague of Jen's at TWIG.
Okay, well, I gotta make that happen.
Yeah, we gotta do that. So we have Jen is back. I'll turn it back over to Jen.
Yeah, sorry about that. My internet crashed. But yeah, I was just saying, just so important to enter a community as a listener first and not go in with assumptions about what people need or how you can help them before you ask them first. Yes. Did y'all get to Jennifer's question or? Okay. So we do have another question in the chat. Jennifer asks, what is the mechanism by which people of color are disproportionately affected by lead poisoning? Is it dumping or lack of maintenance? And then what's the decision point that leads to that harm?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's kind of all of the above. So from a infrastructure perspective, particularly like with water, we have, and I think we all know this at this point, we have old water lines throughout the entire country, especially in your older cities. Also in your cities where they are in economic distress, meaning that they just don't have a lot of money. those cities that don't have a lot of revenue also, in those cities where they have smaller utilities and water facilities. Also, we run across this a lot with on the residential side, both on the lead paint side, but then also like with like indoor plumbing, where we work very closely, for example, in Memphis with the organization, the Memphis Shelby County led Safe Collaborative. Y'all probably may have heard of Chet Kibble before. He's brilliant. But we oftentimes see like literal water fixtures inside of the home that are old, that are leaching lead directly from the source. We also, of course, in older homes where they're so pretty, but people not having money to do modernization, not having even knowledge around programs that may exist to do lead abatement in the home. To get to the part of the question around like dumping, Superfund sites, brownfields are very much so major issues, proximity to incinerators that are disproportionately in proximity to Black and Brown communities and communities in economic distress. That is not talked about as much as it needs to be. And a lot of times in your majority Black and Brown cities, particularly in urban cities, a lot of the cleanups that happen like at Superfund sites don't happen until there's gentrification where development is coming in, and then you have to do an environmental assessment. But what about all of the decades and decades of damage, the public health issues, the people who have lost their lives, the people who have chronic illnesses, literally there was no justice for them. And then also, this is trying to expand a bit about, even with our educational platform, is also like how lead shows up in consumer goods. So like, for example, like in dollar stores or places like with cheap toys that are imported, full of lead, ceramics full of lead, but there not being a lot of regulation on import goods. And then again, it's the same issue where it always shows up most disproportionately in communities in economic distress, Black and Brown communities. So there's a myriad of ways that you can be exposed to lead. And while you'll notice that we're still advocates for environmental justice issues together, our theme is specifically around lead because there's just so many ways. It's everywhere. It's in food. I think about like how traces of lead is found in baby food, but when you connect it back to the land, you know, lead isn't just contained in one space. But I can keep going on and on about that, but a myriad of ways in which people can be exposed to lead, and what our work is to create as many preventable measures as possible and educate people on how they can prevent that in their own respective daily lives.
Thank you, LaTricea. That was a really thorough response. I remember when I see news stories about lead in beauty products or lead in baby toys, it's just, I mean, it's stark. So we have one last question for you that I think will round us out really well. And someone asked how we can support you and your organization.
Yeah, so we love social media, Millennials in the House. So follow us on any and all of our social media platforms. Also, you can go, to our website. I think the link was shared. We have a few still active online petitions, both at like the local level and the federal level. And then also we have a series of virtual events or programming. I know we'll be starting back up our what's called Green Table Talk. We do this in partnership with the Environmental Defense Fund, where we bring in, it's really cool, where we try to demonstrate unity within the Latinx and African American community, and it kind of intersects at environment and policy. So we typically have like a grassroots person and then like a policy person, like, and just blend everything together. We'll be amping up back in August with that. And then next week, we have our episode of Black Girl Blueprint. That's our program, and that focuses on the intersection of maternal health and environment. This one, the title is kind of funny. It's called Hot Mama Summer. Is it climate or is it just me? But it talks about the impacts of, ooh, it is crazy, especially in Memphis. It's been 100 degrees for like 3 weeks. But it talks about the impact of climate on childbirthing people. So any of those things you can check out, that would be very helpful to us.
Thank you so much. You have really empowered, inspired, and connected us this morning. So you are living all of the TWIG tenets, and we really, really appreciate you being here. Just as a very small token of our gratitude, we will have a gift coming your way. So look for that in the mail.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I will turn it over to Elaine for some TWIG announcements at this time, but I did just want to make a quick note that we've changed the timing a little bit of our meeting this morning due to feedback we got in our last meeting. So instead of closing the meeting right at 9 when we finish our announcements, we'll be sticking around for about 10 or 15 more minutes to let people kind of chat about what we heard about and maybe connect and make plans to go to one of our events. So we know everyone's busy, and if you have to jump off at 9, that is totally okay. But if you have a few minutes to stick around, we'll be staying on a little bit longer this morning. So with that, Elaine, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you so much, LaTricea. That was just fantastic. I know you're in New Orleans to educate, but I hope you get some time to just enjoy the Essence Fest just a bit. And thank you for being with us this morning. And thank you all for deciding to spend your first Friday in July with TWIG. We appreciate it. We always like to start by kind of centering on our mission. And as Jen mentioned, we hit all aspects of our mission this morning. We're here to empower, inspire, and connect women who are committed to environmental sustainability. I also want to mention, for those that do not know, Graceland Jones had to resign as TWIG president due to work conflicts. We're definitely sad to lose Graceland, but we as the board are confident that we can lead you in achieving that mission through the remainder of 2022. If you tried to reach Graceland on her TWIG email, it's no longer active, but you can also always reach the board at tnwomeningreen@gmail.com. We also want to always give a shout out to our sponsors. We could not do it without each and every one of you. And even though that slide looks really quite crowded, there's room for more. So if your organization would like to be a sponsor, please check out our website and look at the Become a Sponsor information. We'd love to have you. And we also always want to thank our new and renewing members. Thank you all. So one thing I always like to lift up, and Maris gave the perfect kind of pre-lift on this, was our seed fund. So our seed fund is a year-round TWIG opportunity. Is to support women seeking to expand their skills, knowledge, and experience through continuing education. So you can see there all the qualifying undertakings. Please take advantage of this. It's a great opportunity, and we'd love to have more people tap into it. So to talk about some of the events this month, the Irises Book Club is having a event on July 26th. They always do a kind of book discussion and a service project, and this month it's on the same day. So the Irises Book Club is reading Freedom Farmers by Monica White. On July 26th, that's a Tuesday, at 5, they'll meet in the Magruder Community Garden, 2 gardens, so bring your gardening gloves for that. And then at 7, they'll gather at the Nashville Food Project for a veggie potluck. So they need head count for the potluck. Please RSVP to Irises at TennesseeWomeninGreen.com. other upcoming TWIG events, we've got our TWIG Taco Tuesday coming up on July 12th. Please stay tuned to our social media platforms for the location. Then on Saturday, July 16th, we'll get some relief from the heat at Wade Country. So bring your snacks and join us noon to 2:30 p.m. And then on Sunday, we'll do our monthly TWIG Loves Greenways Walk. That'll be July 31st. And we'll be at the Stones River Greenway at the Coles Trailhead in Donaldson. For upcoming community events, we always want to give a shout out to the Brooklyn Heights Community Garden. You can go to their website and get more information about their event that happens every second Saturday called Growing Grannies. And then they have a first and third Wednesdays volunteer opportunity called the Energy Exchange. And we want to give a special shout out to 2 TWIG members, Renee Barker and Leah Sherry, who both were named 2022 Nashville Emerging Leaders. And that award ceremony is on July 19th. Congratulations to them both. And as always, thank you for spending your morning with us. You can find out more information about us and about our events on our website, and you can connect with us on all of our different social media platforms. So as Jen said, you can hang around and chat more with us, or if we're gonna lose you for other things, have a fantastic rest of the day, holiday weekend, and month.
Thank you, Elaine.